Good morning, everyone. I'm Mike Quaranta with the Delaware State Chamber of Commerce, and thank you for joining our webinar this morning. We've got really rich content. This is one in a number of webinars we've done during the pandemic, and we're grateful for our panelists here today. Just a couple of quick comments that I'd like to make before we get started and get right into it. We have an event on February 11th. At 8:30 in the morning with Jennifer Cohen. This is part of our leadership series, and you are welcome to sign on and join us for that. And then our manufacturing brunch will come later in the month. It's actually in March 24th, and we'd encourage you to sign up for that as well. Let me remind everybody that we do have members of the media with us today, and we're grateful for their participation and attendance. This webinar will be posted on the Chamber's website later today if anybody wants to go back and listen to a piece that they want to replay. And with that, let me just get right to it and introduce our moderator and panelists. I'm grateful to Dr. Janice Nevin, who's the president and CEO of ChristianaCare. She's on our board of directors here at the Delaware State Chamber of Commerce. She's joined by Dr. Michael Ybarra, who's vice president of medical affairs and strategic alliances at PhRMA. He's also an emergency medical physician at Georgetown University Hospitals in Washington. Karyl Rattay, Dr. Karyl Rattay, who's director of Delaware's Division of Public Health, and Vincent Madeline, who's the area healthcare supervisor for Walgreens. They have 62 stores in the state. I hope I got that right, Vince. And 60 of them will be participating in the distribution of the vaccine. But let me turn it over to Stacy Barrick. She's with We Work for Health. Stacy's our sponsor today. Stacy, take it away.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you to the Delaware State Chamber of Commerce for hosting this very vital conversation. The We Work for Health Delaware program works to promote the significant social and economic value of the biopharmaceutical and life sciences sectors in our state. And this year, we're proud to partner with the Partnership to Fight Infectious Diseases in its COVID-19 vaccination efforts. Getting vaccinated is one of the most important steps that we can take to protect ourselves and others from COVID-19, as well as to help end this pandemic as a country. It's important because this virus can cause severe illness or death for many, including people who may not be able to be vaccinated. We Work for Health Delaware is excited to sponsor this important conversation surrounding the COVID-19 vaccine. It's the safety and effectiveness of the vaccines, the differences among them, and what that means for the state of Delaware. So without further ado, it is my great pleasure to turn it over to Dr. Janice Nevin from ChristianaCare.
Thank you so much, Stacy, and it really is a pleasure to be here with all of you today. And a special thank you to Mike Quaranta for arranging this event, and of course to our panelists. It's really hard to believe it's been almost a year since COVID-19 made its way into our state. And there's some good news. We've had a couple of surges, but it looks like, at least right now, there are the new positive case trend is going down. Hospitalizations are trending down, although they are still higher than they were in the spring. So there is some good news. Unfortunately, more than 1,100 of our fellow Delawareans have died from this disease, and many more have experienced a significant impact on their health, as Stacy so eloquently mentioned. I remember at the beginning of the pandemic sort of talking to the team here at Christiana and saying, this isn't going to be a sprint. This is going to be a marathon, and actually it's going to be of the triathlon variety, that we will be in this for a long haul, and each phase of the triathlon is going to bring some new challenges. And I look back over the year, we have learned so much, and throughout the state have deployed a model of care that includes testing, acute care, ambulatory care, virtual care, community engagement. And today we are delivering that full range of healthcare services to meet our community's needs, both safely and effectively, at the same time as we're caring for COVID-19 patients in our hospitals in the community. But clearly, sort of the arrival of the first approved COVID-19 vaccines at the end of 2020, at least for me, said, we're in that third phase of the triathlon. We've hit the road. This is the marathon. It's 26.2 miles. So we've still got a long way to go before we get to the finish line. But the vaccines really represent that proverbial light at the end of the tunnel. So we're really fortunate to be joined by Dr. Michael Ybarra, who is an expert on the vaccines. And, I think we just want to start, Dr. Ybarra, with an overview of the vaccines. Can you tell us about them? Are they safe? Are they effective?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's great to be with you, and particularly it's a great honor to be on such a fantastic panel, including yourself, Dr. Nevin, who's a leader in healthcare and does amazing work in Delaware at ChristianaCare, a really renowned institution. So it's great to be here virtually in Delaware. I would just kind of start with a couple of visuals. I think it really helps frame the conversation. This first slide that you see here, this is COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. And to kind of answer your question, one of the main questions that I get when I'm talking to my family, my friends, my emergency physician colleagues, we all just want to make sure, is this safe? Has this been fully vetted? And while the process has been very, very quick, I do want to reassure everyone listening that no steps were skipped. The process was followed, working very closely with clear guidance from the Food and Drug Administration. And the vaccines are highly, highly effective. So that's really good news. But when people, I think, immediately hear vaccine, they sometimes think, I must be being exposed to like an inactivated form of the virus, something that maybe stopped the virus from being able to replicate, but just kind of exposed me to it so I could learn immunity. And that's really kind of the classic vaccine approach that was, kind of originated or perfected in the 50s and 60s around the time of polio. And it's, not really how we're vaccinating anymore. It's these really new innovative approaches that biopharmaceutical companies are developing in collaboration with academia and governments around the world. And the leading technology is called mRNA. I'm sure you've heard that. The two vaccines that were authorized are called mRNA vaccines, and they're not exposing you to SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19. What they're doing is actually giving you a blueprint so your body produces just that spike protein, that little red spike protein on the outside of the virus. You're just learning how to recognize that spike protein. So it doesn't carry the risk of giving you COVID-19. And that's a very common question that I get. Can you get COVID-19 from the vaccine? And that is not the case. You're being taught to recognize these spike proteins. You're not going to be exposed to COVID. The goal is to prevent you from getting sick when you ever are exposed. And that's really the approach that the two vaccines that have been authorized in the United States took. One is from Pfizer, one is from Moderna. They're both mRNA vaccines. And it's really these mRNA strips that are teaching your body to recognize the spike protein, that red protein that's on the outside. And if you go to the next slide, mRNA vaccines are getting a lot of attention because those are the ones that are authorized so far. But it's important to know that there are other vaccines that are in the pipeline, some very, very close to seeking FDA authorization. You may have heard of Johnson & Johnson just released data last week that's really exciting, in part because the vaccine that they developed is a single dose regimen, which is clearly very important. And it's a new tool that we can add to the arsenal of vaccines, hopefully once the FDA has the ability to review it. There's other vaccines in development that are similar in that they are what we call adenovirus vector vaccines. AstraZeneca and Oxford partnered on developing one. That's not yet been reviewed by the FDA in the US, but it has been approved in other countries, like in the United Kingdom, for example. And then there are other approaches, what we call protein subunit, where we use cells to generate the spike protein, and then that is what we use to vaccinate. So there are a variety of different approaches that are being looked at, and we think that's really important because you need multiple shots on goal, as we like to say, multiple approaches to investigate, because not every vaccine clinical trial is going to be successful. You've probably heard me or others say drug development is a very, very complicated process. It usually takes many, many years and a really long time to develop a new medicine. And most of the time, the development process is not successful. And while the last year has been extremely challenging for all the reasons that were just said in the introduction, we are, if lucky is the right word, we are very grateful and lucky that mRNA vaccines were as successful as they were, and glad to hear the data that was released just in December that showed they're upwards of 95% effective at preventing disease. This is a process that industry takes really seriously. Of course, following all the steps of the clinical trials and working with regulatory agencies to make sure that that the data is there to back it all up. But I, personally, it was something that was really important to me, and I think that a number of physicians took this step, me included. I was seeing the toll that the pandemic was taking. I wanted to do what I could to try and speed this process along. So I went to coronaviruspreventionnetwork.org, which back in July entered my information in. I got contacted by a local academic medical center and was enrolled in one of the mRNA vaccine trials. And it was really eye-opening for me to kind of experience the process. I got a shot in August, I got a shot in September, continued to work clinically in the ER, seeing patients, and so as part of that study, I filled out a daily diary and went to visits over the course of the next few months. Once the vaccine was authorized, I was unblinded and found out that I got placebo. So I got shots of saline. So still contributed to the study, but it was not I didn't get the vaccine. So shortly after that, I got crossed over, or I was able to get actual vaccine, EUA vaccine. And so now fully vaccinated, and it is a really amazing feeling to be able to go into the ER and work and have that kind of extra armor of protection. So, with that, I want to turn it back to you, and that's just, a broad opening to say this process, this process has been very fast, but no steps were skipped, and the information, the efficacy of the vaccine is really, really reassuring, and we're really excited for the rollout and hopeful that more people can get shots in arms quickly. So thanks again for doing this, and thanks for the invitation. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. That was really helpful. And just to kind of underscore a couple of points that you made, regardless of the vaccine, whether it's mRNA or some of the other modalities, they are safe and they are effective, correct? And yeah, even the mRNA, the science behind that was years in the making.
Absolutely.
And I think a decade worth of research that was ready and available once the need came, which was awesome.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think, a lot of folks focus on the fact that this is the first mRNA vaccine authorized, but that doesn't mean that this is the first mRNA vaccine that was studied. And one of the double-edged swords of, we came to an answer so quickly with this vaccine, in part because there's so much disease, there's so much illness that's circulating in the US. So you could come to an answer, you could see the separation in the two groups very quickly because there's a lot of COVID-19. And it's hard to study the efficacy of a vaccine when the pandemic is over, or when the virus is not circulating, and that sometimes is the case. Where SARS, for example, the original SARS, kind of extinguished very quickly. MERS is another example. Both of those viruses are other coronaviruses that we studied, that we learned a lot from, but we didn't get this over the finish line, in part because the pandemic ended, or the epidemic in that case ended. And so, of course, we don't want to see morbidity or mortality. We have way too many cases, way too many people getting sick, being hospitalized with COVID-19, but that did allow us to come to an answer on the efficacy of the vaccines very, very quickly because of the high prevalence of illness that was circulating around the country. So the vaccine clinical trials were completed very quickly, in part because of that.
Yeah, and I know we got some questions ahead of time about, can you get COVID-19 from the virus? And you very clearly, from the vaccine, you very clearly stated no, again, regardless of the kind of vaccine. I am getting asked, which vaccine should I get? Should I wait until the J&J is approved? Should I wait and see if AZ Oxford is approved? Does it matter if it's Pfizer or Moderna? How would you answer that question?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's one that I'm getting a lot as well from friends and family member. And I think that if you are authorized, if you are, able to get a vaccine today, regardless of what it is, it's valuable. You need to get that vaccine if you're eligible for it, and you're eligible for that particular vaccine, and it's your time. And that's because we know what COVID-19 can do to some people. It causes some people to get very, very sick. And has high rates of morbidity and mortality in some populations. So there is no reason to wait if you're eligible to get a vaccine and you meet the criteria for that vaccine. vaccine. There are certain criteria differences. So for example, Pfizer's vaccine was authorized 16 and up, whereas Moderna was 18 and up. So there are criteria that you need to look at. Some people may not be eligible for particular vaccines, but if it's your turn and you're being offered a vaccine, it's really important that you get that vaccine because of the benefits of it.
Thanks. Another question that I keep getting asked is, there are some reports that people have had the vaccine, first dose, maybe 2 doses, and then they are diagnosed with COVID. I think it underscores the importance of the public health measures that we need to continue wearing a mask, washing our hands, watching our distance. But is it possible to get COVID after you've been vaccinated?
Yes, so the vaccine is really effective and it will lower your chances of getting COVID, but they're 95% effective in some clinical trials. So that means a small number of people are going to still get COVID, but 95% efficacy is really, really high. And the other benefit that people maybe haven't quite focused on enough is the fact that in that small number of people that do have the vaccine, have gotten the vaccine but get COVID, the rate of serious COVID is almost zero. So the thing that we really worry about with COVID-19 is getting sick enough to require hospitalization or, of course, death. And the COVID-19 vaccines are very effective at preventing those two things, basically 100% in the data that I've seen. So a small number of people may get COVID-19, but it's much, much less than if you hadn't gotten the vaccine. And then if you are in that small percentage of folks that get sick, your chances of getting really sick are very, very, very low. So there are still benefits even if you do get sick with the virus.
That's great, thanks. Maybe we'll shift to Dr. Rattay to get a sense of, how are we doing in Delaware? So Dr. Rattay, maybe you can share with us, where we are in terms of our plan and our supply and sort of how are you thinking about the future?
Yeah, great. Thanks so much, Dr. Nevin, and really happy to have an opportunity to talk about where we are right now as it relates to the vaccine. And I'll add on to what Dr. Ybarra said. I mean, we are so excited that we've got these two very effective vaccines here in our state. I think the most exciting day of the year was December 15th when we received our first shipment of vaccine. And we have focused very hard as a state, and this has been so important to the governor, to get vaccine to people as quickly as possible. So we're excited that we're in the top 10 of states. We're ranked number 8 as far as getting vaccine administered to people. We have so far received, as of last night, 130,000 doses of vaccine. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about what the phases mean, phase 1A and phase 1B. But when looking at the math for phase 1A and phase 1B, to do 2 doses would be almost 600,000 doses of vaccine. And so we're grateful that we have 13,000 doses of vaccine, but as you can see, that's, about a fourth of what we need just to get through phase 1B. So it's just not enough. The supply isn't what we need. We as a state are ready. We have capacity to administer a lot more vaccine, but the supply by far has been our most limiting factor. Nonetheless, we are again, super excited that we have a lot of Delawareans protected now that weren't just a couple months ago. So let me talk a little bit about the phases. And I have to say, and I'm sure Dr. Nevin remembers this too, I started my job 12 years ago during H1N1. And I remember the allocation of vaccines and how incredibly stressful and challenging that was. And when this pandemic evolved last spring, I, to be quite honest, I began to dread going through this phase that we're in right now, where we have significant scarcity of vaccine. We just don't have anywhere near enough vaccine, and a lot of emails that I have received, and I've received a lot of unhappy emails from people who compare it to the Hunger Games, and I get why people feel that way. There is a federal committee, ACIP or ACIP, people call it, with a lot of very, very smart people. In fact, ChristianaCare's own Marcy Dries is on that committee, and they have spent many, many hours looking at the research and also, really determining what's the best way to organize who should get the vaccine in what order. We in Delaware have our own state ethics committee that has also spent many hours looking at those ACIP recommendations and determining, how we want to roll this out in Delaware accordingly. So I just wanted to start with that by saying we don't make this up here in the Division of Public Health. That being said, we know that no matter how we go about doing this, many people are going to be unhappy, and that's an unfortunate aspect of having something so scarce. But the ethics committee determined that what was most important, number one, was saving lives and preventing hospitalization, protecting our critical healthcare infrastructure, which when we saw what happened in early January with our significant peak and the impact of having sick or quarantined healthcare workers, that it's critically important that we protect our healthcare workforce, as well as our general frontline workforce, and also ensure that we're addressing equity. So those are the main principles of those who looked at how do we organize how this vaccine is rolled out. 1A, and most all individuals at this point should have had an opportunity for at least their first, if not their second dose of vaccination in the 1A population. That includes the critical health care workforce, including many first responders who have a medical role, as well as long-term care residents and staff. That entails about 80,000 people in our state who are in 1A. As we saw our surge in December and January, and we saw, a significant increase in deaths, we wanted to quickly move to the 65 plus population and as quickly as we could protect those individuals. And so we did move to 1B several weeks ago. And our focus on 1B to date has really been those individuals who are 65 and up. So there are folks in the workforce who are in 1B. There's also folks in the workforce who are in 1C, and I'm happy to talk about that in more detail, but I just want to say we really have not moved too far into the 1B workforce components yet. We have just started with some vaccination of teachers, soon childcare providers, some correctional officers. But again, really our focus on 1B right now is 65 individuals who are 65 and up. So the critical workforce for 1B, again, it really is based on risk. These are the folks who are out there interacting with the public, interacting often in ways where they aren't protected. Maybe the people they're interacting with aren't wearing face coverings. So that's the rest of the first responders, educators, especially K through 12, child care, food manufacturing, especially poultry, and those who are in settings where it's difficult to social distance, public transit, again, those interacting with public, as well as grocery store workers are in 1B, but we don't have them ranked all the same because there is a different risk within each of those categories. There's also, so take agriculture as an example. Somebody who's working in a poultry plant is at much higher risk if they can't social distance compared to somebody who's a private farm owner. And so again, we're looking at risk accordingly. 1C, I don't want to go into too much detail in 1C, but it focuses on high risk chronic conditions, people who live in congregate settings, as well as people in transportation, public works, finance, IT, a lot of folks in government. But again, these are people who really are interacting with the public. So among that group, let's say finance, if you're in a bank and you're interacting with people, you're at much higher risk than somebody who can right now telework. So that's kind of how the thinking is around all of this. Happy to go into more detail about kind of how we're planning to matchmake and organize how vaccination happens for certain workforce. But that's where we are.
Thanks, Karyl. I think it is, it has been hard for people to actually sort of understand, the phase rollout. And I think the good news is, and I'm entirely optimistic about where we're headed. The good news is we were very worried people wouldn't want to get the vaccine. And we've heard loud and clear that our fellow citizens in Delaware want the vaccine. So I think that's really good news. And I'm actually optimistic that over the next few weeks, the supply will increase and there will be more opportunity. We have employers who are participating today, small, medium, large, supersized. And one of the things that they have seen on the website is, that their there's an expectation that they will play a role in getting their employees vaccinated. And so I think a lot of questions about what exactly do you want an employer to do right now? What is it that you want them to do? And there's been, and how do they find a partner to actually administer the vaccine?
Yeah, really, really great question. And when it's appropriate, I can show on my next slide the email address that we want people to reach out to us with. But for employers, if they haven't already, we want them to reach out to us at vaccine planning. So the email's vaccineplanning@delaware.gov. And there's a survey that will allow those who are employers to put more information about their particular situation into the survey for us to begin working with employer groups on what vaccine planning might look like for them. So, all of our hospitals, much of our healthcare settings, were able to vaccinate themselves. The poultry plants, as an example, most of them have occupational health and they're able to do their own vaccination. And so getting vaccine to them is really what they need. But then there's others, let's say the educators. So we are matchmaking. We do a lot of matchmaking. That's what we see our role right now is we identify our particular group, community or workforce group, and where they're located, what are their specific needs, and we matchmake them with vaccinators, including our pharmacies have been already played a great role. We have healthcare providers, both our hospitals, as well as some other privately owned groups that are doing vaccinations. So what we need is just information about your specific setting, and we can help you know what phase that you're in, but then also really start planning what might be the best fit for you to get your group of employees vaccinated at the appropriate time. We also, I should add, we also do ask you to think about your employees as it relates to risk. So for example, who can't social distance, who's interacting with the public versus who's at home, working at home and at lower risk. So those are all things that we want you to think about what are the numbers, and then we'll work with you.
So thanks, Karyl. So most importantly, if people haven't gone to vaccineplanning@delaware.gov, this is a call to do that and fill out the information so when the time is right, the plan can be formulated. So that's really helpful. Before I hand over to Vinny, because I know the pharmacies are going to be really important partners, in vaccinating the community. Dr. Ybarra, can I just ask you one more question? You know, one of the things that we get asked frequently is, can employers mandate that their employees get the vaccine? And, you know, my understanding is that because of the EUA, that is not possible. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that, you know, it's probably best to check with like your local kind of council, folks that can give you real direct, specific Delaware guidance. My understanding is that, you know, employers are kind of more right now really doing everything they can to do more of like a carrot approach as opposed to a stick approach. So there's lots of ideas for ways that you can incentivize folks to get the vaccine, you know, things that you can encourage them. I mean, I've even heard some companies that are doing financial incentives, giving paid time off in order to go get it. So I've heard a lot more about kind of the carrot approach versus the stick approach. I will say in a clinical setting like you run a hospital, you know, where I work clinically, we are required to get flu vaccines every year, but we have not yet moved to requiring the COVID vaccine. And I think that's in part because of you know, supply, number one, but then also the EUA and just kind of the emergency use authorization and wanting to give employees the option. But I think it is worth just focusing on what everyone can do across the ecosystem, employers, you know, ourselves in industry, to just encourage folks to get the vaccine, to feel really comfortable and confident. And one key step is ask questions. Like, don't be afraid to ask questions. Ask any doctor in your network, ask me, ask anyone on the panel. You know, don't be afraid to ask questions. The questions I get are the same, very similar. My family's asking the same ones as my colleagues at PhRMA, as my colleagues in the emergency department, the staff in the emergency department. We all have the same questions, so don't be afraid to ask them.
Thanks. And of course, I think the biggest incentive is the more people we get vaccinated, the quicker we get back.
Yep, that's right.
Great things that we like to do that we haven't.
Exactly.
So that's the biggest incentive. Thank you for that. Vinny, I'm going to turn things to you, and I know you have a few slides. You know, from the very beginning, there's been a plan to engage pharmacies, and there was some news this week from the Biden administration that they intend to supply pharmacies directly. So could you talk about your role at Walgreens in helping get the vaccine out to people?
Yeah, Dr. Nevin, thank you. And it's funny, as you and Dr. Rattay were talking, and Dr. Rattay talked about H1N1, you know, I'm a pharmacist by degree and was a pharmacy manager in Delaware when that hit. And I remember the same stress and the concern around doses. But again, I was very optimistic, and I've gotten a lot of, you know, feedback, family members, friends asking, my pharmacist asking about it. But the fact that everyone wants the vaccine, or we have such, you know, a positive response from that, really gives me a lot of hope. It makes me really excited. So if we can just pull up the slides, I'll start off and kind of talk a little bit about what the process is going to look like. So again, and I know Dr. Rattay showed a very similar slide. So again, we follow the CDC, federal and state governments in terms of who we're going to vaccinate. So we work very closely with DHSS to really work to get the vaccine to the right individuals. And for as much as we would love to do everyone, because like I said, as pharmacists, that is our oath. That is what we want to do. We want to protect and serve our communities. You know, a lot of times it has to do just with how many doses we have and how do we prioritize the most vulnerable patients until that supply comes back. So one of the things that you probably all heard of or heard about was on, you know, hopefully we're thinking February 12th. Again, the federal government is hoping to allocate doses. But in the meanwhile, the great state of Delaware and DHSS, huge shout out to you guys. We've been able to partner at state level and get some of those doses in some of our stores now. And one of the great things we did this year was we partnered with the state of Delaware in about 20 to 22 sites with COVID testing. And it was very unique to our company, and we had great success with it. And one of the things that we did was we worked with DHSS really around, you know, that health equity piece and really thinking about, okay, where are the best places we can put these to help our most vulnerable population? So since we already had that infrastructure for almost about a year, you know, we're able to at least get those doses to some of those said pharmacies to make sure that we are getting it to the patients that really need it. So next slide, please. So I think a lot of times, and again, I've had, you know, Dr. Ybarra talked about he's getting questions from friends and family. We all are, and I have as well. You know, one of the biggest questions is, well, how does this work? Or how would we have supply, or when we eventually get supply, how does that work? How do I make an appointment? So, you know, one of the things that we do have, if you go to www.walgreens.com, /COVID-19 VAC, it'll bring you to our appointment scheduler. That online appointment scheduler, and you can kind of see the pictures of what it's going to look like. That will be active for sites that have the inventory. And then what happens is that you actually go on, and we have a link that actually links you to your state eligibility. And the first question asks if you have checked your state eligibility and if you fall into one of these categories. And then after that point, you actually proceed forward, and it's going to ask you a couple other screening questions. And after you go through the screening questions, it'll have the option to actually search for your Walgreens closest to you. Like Mike mentioned, we actually have 62 stores. We have 2 additional specialty sites in Wilmington and Dover that are at least registered to be able to receive vaccines. And you'll actually be asked to schedule your first dose and your second dose at the same time. And then you'll get a confirmation number, and that information gets fed into our stores, where we also can see what appointments are upcoming. And then typically what happens is that when you come in, we do have you sign an additional attestation form that basically confirms that everything that you answered is true and accurate. And then from there, either one of our pharmacists or one of our trained vaccinating technicians will then administer the vaccine. We go over the education piece, the importance about waiting at least 15 minutes so we can observe you for any type of adverse events. And like I said, you also would be scheduling your second appointment at the same time. So then we would typically see you either 21 or 28 days later. So one of the key call outs is that when you do this process, one of the things, if you haven't had a Walgreens.com account, that is something that it will ask you to create. So one of the concerns out of many of my pharmacists is, well, what happens if we, you know, if we have a patient that doesn't have a smartphone, who doesn't have access to technology, how is that going to work? In the upcoming weeks, and we're hoping very soon, we'll have 2 enhancements. One will have a phone enhancement that will basically have a call center around helping people to schedule their vaccines. And then we also have an in-store option in terms of us being able to adjust an appointment or add an appointment. However, as you can guess, our pharmacists are still dispensing, they're still counseling, they're still giving other vaccines, we're still giving flu shots. So really the online is really the way to go, because it does a lot for you. If we want to move to the next slide. And then typically, I think as we move forward, we'll see this process change as we get more stock and depending on what other vaccines come out. But if you do come in without an appointment, there's 2 options that our teams will help you through. One will be directing you to our online appointment scheduler, or if they don't have it, then we can assist with scheduling someone from one of our sites. So again, that's kind of an overview, a high-level overview of how to when it comes to scheduling your vaccine. And again, like I said, I know that my pharmacists are passionate about vaccinating as many people as they can. And just like Dr. Rattay said, we're working with states, federal governments, around that allocation. And as we continue to get more and more able to move through those phases, the ability to vaccinate more people will actually continue to grow.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Very helpful. And I think I would just say, when I was practicing clinical medicine, I always wanted a clinical pharmacist on the team. So for everyone on the call, I think in addition to our nurses and doctors and respiratory therapists, our clinical pharmacists have been true heroes during the pandemic, and it's just great to see them really step up also now and help us vaccinate people. One of the questions that came in is, it's safe to get a vaccine in a pharmacy? The allergic reactions to the vaccines, very rare, which is good news, and I mean very, very rare. But it can happen. So is a pharmacy able to manage someone in that rare case that there may be an adverse reaction?
Yeah. Hey, thanks, Dr. Nevin, for asking that, because I know that it's a concern. The answer is absolutely. So all of our immunizers, whether it be a pharmacist or technician, they actually go through CPR training and emergency allergic reaction training. So we do have epinephrine in stock. We do have emergency protocols. And I think a lot that has to do with avoiding that is to do proper screening. And we do have a vaccine administration record that we use where we do have specific questions, and a lot of them are CDC screening questions. And our pharmacists really go through that screening process to try to proactively identify any risks of having an allergic reaction. And if there is one, or they feel that based off the patient history or previous allergies or allergy to a different vaccine, if they feel that it would not be safe, that's where really we either defer or we do work with them and their physician to see if in fact it is appropriate. But yes, the pharmacies are equipped with that, with the epinephrine, obviously blood pressure monitors, and we have an entire emergency protocol in case that does happen. The teams can react quickly.
Great, thank you. The issue of equity has been brought up a couple of times. Maybe Dr. Ybarra, if I could go back to you. I know when the trials were taking place, there was a concern about trials, making sure that Black and Brown people were fully represented in the trials. Can you maybe share how did that play out when it came to the clinical trials?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think I can start by saying just my own experience. Participating in a clinical trial was very eye-opening to kind of understand why there are some natural barriers to not everyone being able to participate in a clinical trial. I had to drive an hour each way. So that means you have to have access to a car and have a job flexible enough to allow you to travel that much and sit in a visit for 3 to 4 hours and participate in all these follow-up calls, et cetera. So there's a lot of physical barriers. That said, all companies that are conducting clinical trials made significant commitments and did a lot of outreach to try and improve the diversity in the clinical trial, so that at the end of the day, we can say definitively that this vaccine has been tested in a number of communities and it shows efficacy in the community. So whether that's Black communities, Hispanic communities, and others, we want to have subgroup data. And I think the companies that conducted the clinical trials did an excellent job. Typically, we see much lower rates of participation of underrepresented minorities in clinical trials than we did in the COVID vaccine trials. So there was really great uptake, and we have a lot of work to do to sustain that and even improve it moving forward for other diseases, so that we see that representation play out in other disease states like cancer and other illnesses. We're seeing now that the equitable kind of access and distribution is remaining an issue. Lots of states and jurisdictions have taken different approaches to that. I think a lot of the things that we learned from the outreach and the clinical trial recruitment could be applied to this, making sure that we're communicating with people in their communities. And then just from an infrastructure standpoint, I think one of the biggest challenges is just making sure that the sites that the vaccines are being administered are in the locations, or in every zip code, for example, or in every community. And as we're seeing the vaccine kind of distribution expand, as Vincent said, to more pharmacies, communities that have pharmacies, where, just reaching people where they are is going to be really, really critical. So to kind of come back to your question, the clinical trials did a good job of incorporating, more diversity than is standard. We have a long way to go to build on that. That's not the end game, but that is significant progress. And now, of course, in vaccinating America, we need to make sure that we're doing that in an equitable way as well.
Thank you so much. Dr. Rattay, how is Delaware addressing issues of equity?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Nevin, for the question. This is a concern at top of mind for us right now. And we know that when we look at our data, that right now we're not vaccinating Delawareans in a way that represents the demographics of our state, and that's very concerning. We talked about this 60, our focus on our seniors, and we have created a wait list for our seniors, but we know even when we look at that wait list, that does not represent the demographics of our state. We also know with some of the 1A vaccination efforts that took place, for example, in long-term care, we know that there are differences in those who are choosing to be vaccinated by race and ethnicity, even in the healthcare system. So we have some work to do. We have some work to do to improve our data, to make sure that we're getting race and ethnicity on everybody who's vaccinated. We have some work to do around education, but we also have a lot of work to do around access. And so some of our vaccine allocation is now focused, we're working with our Walgreens partners, for example, on ensuring that we have more vaccine in the zip codes that we're the most concerned about. Same with healthcare providers. Dr. Nevin, you and your other hospital colleagues are really helping by doing events in the community as well to help us reach people who may be more difficult to reach. And often that's not going to be through an electronic wait list. It's really getting into the community and really meeting people where they are. We're starting today with our public health team, getting into some of the Wilmington senior high rises, again, meeting people where they are. We think that this is really going to be so important in addressing equity. So it's really a multi-partner approach. Our federally qualified health centers obviously are trusted partners in our community, and they also play a significant role, as do our faith-based leader partners. Those are often entities that are trusted in our communities. So again, multifaceted strategy, and that's really what it takes.
Thank you. One of the other concerns that people have had, particularly in the last couple of weeks, have been the emergence of variants. The UK variant, the South Carolina variant, California, South Africa, Brazil. Dr. Ybarra, can you talk a little bit about, how worried should we be about these variants? Will the vaccine still be effective?
Sure. Well, I think the good news on the variants, I think a lot of us are concerned to answer first. However, the good news is that the clinical trial data that we have where vaccines have been studied in areas where these variants were very common is that we do see a drop off in efficacy, a decrease in efficacy in some of the geographic areas, but we don't see that decrease in morbidity and mortality that I talked about at the very beginning, where we're still seeing the vaccines very, very effective at preventing, highly symptomatic COVID-19 or people that need to be hospitalized, and certainly, even worse. And so that, is obviously goal number one. We want to keep people out of the hospital and getting so sick that they wind up on life support. That's goal number one. We were really excited in December to hear the positive news about highly effective vaccines that meant we might be able to extinguish even symptomatic disease altogether. So that has diminished a little bit with the news of the variants, that I think we are nervous to see how this plays out, but that doesn't mean we should lose all optimism. There's still tremendous value that the vaccines will provide. And we just need more information on how this is going to play out. I will say that the good news about the platforms have been developed. The companies are already looking into how you might make modifications or tweaks to think about a booster shot. And those trials are being enrolled now, where you're going to look at vaccinating folks at 6 months or a year and how you might want to make some changes, kind of like a flu shot. I don't want to say that's what it's going to become, because we just need more data to explain how that will happen. But thankfully, these vaccine platforms are very these new vaccine platforms are able to make adjustments if that would be needed down the road.
That's good news. And I think, again, just underscores the need to wear a mask, watch your distance, wash your hands, and continue to follow those
Exactly.
those public health measures, really important. We get asked a lot of questions about the second dose.
Mhm.
So here are a few. I got Moderna. Can I get Pfizer as my second dose, or do I have to get Moderna? I only got 1 dose of Pfizer. Should I just wait until J&J comes out and then get a dose of J&J? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Please follow the kind of protocol that you're on. If you start with 1 vaccine, make sure you finish with 1 vaccine. Same brand, they're not interchangeable, and the FDA has guidance on when you should get your second shot. It's a little bit different for Moderna and for Pfizer, so just follow that card. I have mine right here, and basically they tell you when to come back for your second appointment. Make sure you get that second appointment because you'll get the full benefit of the vaccine when you get the 2 shots. If it's a couple of days off, there is wiggle room. So I don't want to say like if it's not exactly 21 days, if it's 22, that's not a problem. But if you're putting it off for weeks, that's not really that's not what the FDA says when they authorize the vaccine. That's not what states are doing when they're rolling it out. So it's really important to stick with the manufacturer and the general time frame of when you should get the second shot.
Thanks. So a little bit related to that, we've had people who maybe got their first dose in Florida and they're coming back to Delaware. Can they get their second dose in Delaware, or do they have to go back to Florida? In other words, is the Moderna that's being given in Florida sort of the same as the Moderna that's being given in Delaware?
Certainly. Well, I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in on that. The vaccines are being distributed across the country, so there will be a supply of vaccine from that manufacturer in your state. I don't know, Dr. Rattay, if you want to handle the kind of logistical issues of how you get the second shot in Delaware, though.
Thanks. Yeah, that would be great, Dr. Rattay. If you could also, share, the sort of the plan for the second doses in Delaware. We've been very successful with first doses. Again, people are asking just very practical questions about, when do I get it? Where do I go? Do I have to go to the same place? If I'm traveling, if I spend my summer somewhere else and that's when the window falls, can I get it there? So I think what I'm hearing you say, Dr. Ybarra, it is really important to get that second dose so that you're fully immunized. Maybe Dr. Rattay, you can address that, how we're doing that in Delaware.
Yeah, absolutely. So we completely agree. It's very important to get the second dose and to get it as close to 21, 28 days as possible. I will go on a little bit of a tangent there and say there was a period in early January where the former administration, came out to the governors and said, don't hold on to your second doses. You need to use them. You're going to have adequate supply. And in fact, we will penalize states that don't keep up with their allocations by not giving them, adequate amounts of future allocations. So Delaware focused on getting as much out as we could. Unfortunately, then for several weeks after, not only did we not get more, we got a lot less vaccine than we had gotten in previous weeks. So again, we are focused on everybody getting their vaccine as close to 21 or 28 days as possible. Supply, though, has become a little bit more problematic for those who got the Moderna vaccine because that's just the way this fell out. So people who have gotten their first vaccine, we're going to make it available to you as quickly as we can, close to those dates. It depends where you got it, how you're going to be notified. We had a number of DPH events where we vaccinated up to about 25,000 people. Some of them are in a registration system and they'll be notified through that and they can schedule. Some were not, and they'll be getting postcards or other notification as far as where's the best place to go. But if you got it at another kind of an event, then your notification may look very differently. Our hope going forward, and again, this is supply dependent, is that for those who get their first dose, that their second dose can be scheduled right away. Now, occasionally it's going to have to be canceled if we don't keep up with the supply, and we know that doesn't make people happy. But we also know that people get very anxious when they don't have their second dose scheduled. And so, that those are things that we're focused on going forward. One of the questions about, if you got your vaccine in Florida and you come up here, what we're saying to people is keep that card, the card that Dr. Ybarra held up. keep that card with you, or at the very least, take a picture of it. And so we've got verification. We may not as readily have your vaccine information if you got vaccinated in Florida, but if you've got that card, that gives us the information we need about what vaccine and when. So that's one of our strongest recommendations. Keep that card.
Okay, thanks. And one of the questions I saw in the chat was, will Walgreens do second doses? You know, if I got my first dose of, say, Moderna at one of the drive-through events, but I have the chance to schedule my second dose, I have my card at the Walgreens. Vincent, will we be able to do that at Walgreens?
So the answer is that we want to do it. Again, back to kind of what Dr. Rattay said, it's all going to depend on supply and demand. You know, we definitely want to be able to help anyone that we can get that dose. But as Dr. Rattay said, it really comes down to what that allocation is going to look like.
Great, thanks. We just have a few minutes left, and there's some great questions that are coming through the chat that, you know, again, really, I think speak to some of the current practical challenges that people are having in Delaware. You know, for example, this question came up ahead of time and again on the chat that, you know, someone who may have registered in 3 or 4 different places and is waiting to hear back from one of them. You know, thoughts, Dr. Rattay, about, you know, how we can help people maybe streamline some of that process of registration. And I do think, you know, saw another a question in the chat, or a comment in the chat, that gets to equity, that so many elderly people may not have access to a computer, or may not be able to drive. And so from a practical perspective, how do they engage in this process?
Yeah, great question. Let me take the second part of that first, because we recognize that the population we're focused on right now may not be as familiar and comfortable with technology as some of our younger folks. And so we do have a call center that if individuals either want help getting on a registration system, getting on our registration system, or we are calling it a waiting list, we can help walk them through that process. We can also provide some guidance as well. So let me just say that number, which is 833-643-1715 is our call center number. And so that is, of course, a way that people can get onto our wait list. Again, when I mentioned the math before, I think one of the hardest things for people right now is to recognize that we just can't vaccinate everybody who's 65 and older right now, as much as we want to. And so even with the wait list we have, we really are sending out invitations based on age and based on chronic conditions, because we want to protect those that are most vulnerable to start with. That's a question that comes up a lot. If I, you know, got on that wait list in the first hour that it was open, shouldn't I have gotten called? Well, not if you're a healthy 65-year-old. And so, you know, we recommend that people take advantage of the different registration opportunities through the pharmacies, you know, reaching out to their primary care and other physicians. And the first opportunity you get to get the vaccine, we say take advantage of it.
Great, thank you. So it looks like we're coming to the end of the hour. So I really want to say thank you to each of our panelists. You know, this has been challenging from the very beginning, and the rapid pace of learning continues. And as I said earlier, I'm actually quite optimistic that we're going to get this done. And I know that the employers in the state of Delaware will also roll up their sleeves and work across the state so that we can get people vaccinated. A certain amount of patience is needed right now, but I would inject that with some optimism about what will take place over the coming weeks and months. So thank you for your leadership, Dr. Rattay. Thank you, Vinny, for your leadership and what we will be seeing in the pharmacies. And Dr. Ybarra, thank you for visiting us in Delaware virtually. I know you've also been serving on the front line, caring for patients in the emergency department. I didn't realize that you participated in the clinical trials, but again, thank you for all that you're doing in caring for all of us as we continue to work our way through this pandemic. And before I turn it back to Mike, I have to do my public service announcement for the third time, which is, yes, the light is there at the end of the tunnel because of the vaccines, but we are still in this. You've probably heard a little bit of conversation this week about, making sure that Sunday, the Super Bowl doesn't become another super spreader event as we, sort of think about the gatherings that might take place. And again, just really important to wear a mask, watch your distance, wash your hands, and pay attention to, all of those public health measures that we're being asked to do in terms of avoiding large gatherings. And as I think you've heard loud and clear, the vaccines are safe, they're effective, some supply challenges, be patient. And if you have the opportunity, because you're in one of the groups and you get the chance to get the vaccine, please do so. And again, I think we'll a few months from now, we'll be able to look back and feel really sort of proud of the work that we've done together to keep our community safe. So thanks to all of you. And Mike, thank you for getting this group together. I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thank you, Dr. Nevin. Appreciate very much your moderating all of this today. Let me thank all our panelists as you did. We're grateful for your time and efforts. Stacy, for We Work for Health, for your sponsorship. Supply really, really matters. And that came through loud and clear today, and we're all anxious for that. We can't distribute, Vince and people at the pharmacies, the folks on the front line who do have supply can't administer that which they don't have. So we're all anxious for greater supplies, and it's nice to know that we've got the efficacy that Dr. Ybarra talked about. We've got people who are organized and prepared to get this out. They've been getting it out, people like at ChristianaCare and other places, but we really just are anxious to get our hands on more supply. So Janice, your final thoughts there, where you just reminded everybody, until such time, and even afterwards, just take extra care to be safe personally, especially if you're in settings where you're around other people. So with that, let me thank everybody one more time. Appreciate everybody who signed up today to listen. This will be posted later on this afternoon. Thank you, and everybody be safe, and look forward to our next event. So long.